Well, another season is completed, and for the most part, it was a success, and for some, it was a disaster. I had the pleasure of watching AC Milan's preseason tour in the United States, and little did I know, I got a sneak peek of what was to come next season results wise. Blowing leads after convincing halves of football. After dominating Real Madrid 2-0 in the first half, losing the game 3-2 as Luka Modric and Vinicius Jr. come on, the next game versus Juventus, we were leading 1-0, and Juventus equalized and we lose on penalties. After a toxic summer with the fans seeing the departure of Paolo Maldini and Sandro Tonali, us tifosi were left with a lot of questions. But with the Tonali funds, we invested heavily in the market to reinforce the team by bringing in Chelsea's Christian Pulisic and Loftus-Cheek, Dutch midfielder Tijani Reinders, and Nigerian winger Samuel Chukwueze from Villarreal. The names I mentioned didn't catch the eyes of us supporters, but to our surprise, they would be the catalyst in multiple games this season, starting with our first two games versus Bologna and Torino. Most notably, Christian Pulisic pulled the attention of a lot of fans by scoring in his first two games in a Milan shirt after struggling with Chelsea. Our first test of the season would come in back-to-back fixtures with Roma away and the derby versus Inter after an international break. With the gritty match that we knew Jose Mourinho's Roma would bring, we won 2-1 with the dispense of Fikayo Tomori getting a red card. Our best defender would miss the derby. And my God, I've been a Milan fan for over a decade, and this was hands down the worst derby I've ever seen us play. We got absolutely bent over 5-1 in the worst, most humiliating derby losses in the 125 years of AC Milan's history, and certainly one of the worst I've seen as a Milan fan. Thankfully, we turned over the page and won 3 on the bounce, beating Hellas Verona, Cagliari, and Lazio 2-0 in the San Siro while only conceding 1 goal. With positive performances continuing for Christian Pulisic, there was question marks arising from Rafael Leao as he only scored 3 goals in 7 games. October would be the point in the season where it fell apart for us, winning 1 game versus Genoa thanks to an 87th minute goal from Pulisic, and from there it went downhill, losing 1-0 to Juventus after a silly first half red card from Malik Thiaw and a goal from AC Milan's former youth academy product Manuel Locatelli to win the game for Juventus. And ironically, he scored it on the exact same day for AC Milan versus Juventus 7 years previously in a 1-0 victory for the Rossoneri. And remember when I said that the preseason would be a sneak peek of the season to come? Well, in the very next game, being up against the current Serie A champions Napoli, we found ourselves up 2-0 after arguably playing our best half of football that season. And then it completely fell apart and conceded 2 goals in 13 minutes to tie the game. And this match was most definitely 3 points dropped for Milan. And this was the match that Olivier Giroud famously said, "We didn't know whether to attack or defend after the first Napoli goal." And from there, that's when the uncomfortable Pioli conversation started to take place. After a disastrous October, we were hoping to turn the page for a more positive November. And of course, in typical Milan fashion, we folded up against Udinese, who hasn't won a single game at that point all season, and they come to our backyard in the San Siro and beat us 1-0. And even though at that point we were going through a massive injury crisis, the standards of Milan should be a lot more bigger than this because there is no excuse to lose to a team that hasn't won all season. And things went from bad to worse, and we fans were hoping that the misery would stop. But once again, we would blow another 2-goal lead and almost lost the game, but thanks to a VAR disallowed goal in the 90th minute plus 4 minutes of stoppage time for Lecce, Milan were very lucky to escape the game, grabbing 1 point. As November came to an end, Milan were winless in their last 4 games, and thanks to another international break, we are hoping that Milan can maybe recuperate and string up together a couple results to end off the year well. And we do so, winning 4 games out of 6 versus a tricky Fiorentina side, thanks to a Teo Hernandez penalty, a dominant win versus Frosinone in the San Siro, when we saw Mike Maignan grab another assist, being the only goalkeeper to have an assist in 3 consecutive seasons, and we saw the debut of 16-year-old Francesco Camarda. Another great victory versus region rivals Monza, as we saw Primavera product Giancarlo Simic grab his first senior goal for Milan, and closing off the year with a 1-0 win versus Sassuolo thanks to a goal from Christian Pulisic. And if you're wondering what the other two fixtures were, it was a loss to Atalanta, who won the game in the 95th minute from a Luis Muriel backheel after we busted our ass to come back. And the other fixture was versus bottom of the table Salernitana, while losing the game as Serie A veteran Antonio Candreva scores in the 63rd minute. And it's once again Luka Jovic who saves us and scores a 90th minute equalizer to bring home 1 point. At this moment, we were halfway through the season, and at the end of the year, Milan were in 3rd place, 9 points behind Inter and 7 points behind Juventus, losing 2 out of 7 games at home, but our away form was when it was in the bin, only winning 4, drawing 2, and losing 3 games away from home. We could have taken away a lot of points if this team didn't blow all those 2-goal leads that I mentioned earlier. So let's just say in this hypothetical situation, if you take the loss versus Udinese, give us the win, and the results versus Napoli that we threw away, and our 2-goal lead versus Lecce, that's 9 points you add to our tally, and just like that, we are in the title race. Before we continue in the Serie A, make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe, and make sure you guys check us out on all of our socials at Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and bunches, all at Homa Milan. But let's quickly review our Champions League games while all this nonsense in the league was going on. After a successful campaign in last year, reaching the semifinals since 2007, Milan were hoping to make a similar push with a group consisting of PSG, Borussia Dortmund, and Newcastle United, with a lot of headlines and storylines going into this group being Pulisic playing against his former team Borussia Dortmund, Sandro Tonali returning to the San Siro since his transfer to Newcastle United, but us fans were foaming at the mouth to see Donnarumma return since doing us dirty and leaving us on a free transfer. I'd say the vast majority of football fans had Milan going through to the knockout stages. Little did we know, we had 2 semi-finalists in our group. In our first game in the San Siro, Milan welcomed back Sandro Tonali, and Milan doing Milan things, being wasteful in front of goal and wasting great goal-scoring opportunities. Newcastle escaped Milan with a 0-0 draw, and similarly in our next match versus Borussia Dortmund away, it was much of the same, Milan playing a lot better of the time and grab another 0-0 draw. Milan versus PSG would be the really big test of the season in the Champions League, and we got absolutely dunked on by Kylian Mbappe and co in the Parc des Princes. With the group stages halfway through, Milan sat at the bottom of the group with no goals scored so far, and our next game was going to be PSG in the San Siro, and it looked like we could be in some trouble. But this game was hands down my favorite game of the season. Donnarumma returning to San Siro for the first time since his transfer to the Parisians, and received a very warm welcome from the Curva Sud, having dollars with Gigio's name printed on them with Mercenario on the top of the dollar, which translates to mercenary. And while PSG went up 9 minutes into the game, Milan did well to respond and did so with a Rafael Leao bicycle kick. And later on, Giroud scores in the 50th minute to give us the victory, and Milan get our first win in the Champions League this season. However, the party would run short as Dortmund came to the San Siro and completely outplayed us. With a great defensive performance from Mats Hummels, Milan lost the game 3-1. In a must-win game to secure Europa League football at best, we traveled to St. James's Park to face Newcastle United, and much like the PSG game, Milan go down with a screamer from Brazilian midfielder Joelinton. Being down 1-0 at halftime, Milan needed to wake up because at the time we were bottom of the group. Christian Pulisic gives us a lifeline, and he scores in the 60th minute, and Samuel Chukwueze gets subbed on, and 1 minute later scores a great goal to give Milan the lead and thus ending our Champions League campaign, but starts our Europa League conquest. A fresh new start of the year, and Milan did well, grabbing 3 wins in a row, beating Empoli 3-0 and seeing the eventual sacking of Jose Mourinho, doing the double over Roma this season. Also beating an Udinese team while Mike Maignan was racially abused during the game, so to beat them was extra special. After almost beating Bologna, we give away a silly penalty at the end of the game for Bologna to equalize from new winter transfer Filippo Terracciano. Of course, Bologna convert their penalty in the 92nd minute and tie the game, but we also missed 2 penalties in the same game, so once again, it's points dropped for us. However, we do continue our unbeaten run for another 2 games. After beating Napoli in the special edition Pleasures 4th kit, we take on Monza, who we convincingly beat in the reverse fixture 3-0. And in this match, we threw out a B team and lose 4-2 after making a 2-0 comeback thanks to Christian Pulisic in the 88th minute, but it just wasn't enough as current loanee Lorenzo Colombo scores and beats his former employer. At this point of the season, Milan still remains in 3rd place, but now 1 point behind 2nd place Juventus, but still 11 points behind Inter, who at this point of the season looked like they were going to win the title. Thankfully, after the Monza disaster, Milan go on the longest unbeaten run of the season, going 7 games unbeaten, only drawing to Atalanta thanks to a goal from Rafael Leao and a second draw to Sassuolo from an 84th minute equalizer from Noah Okafor. Before we wrap up the league, let's go back to our Europa League conquest. Because we got 3rd place in our Champions League group, Milan got placed in a playoff match versus Stade Rennes. Right off the bat, Milan take the first leg with a comfortable 3-goal lead thanks to a helpful red card that helped get the job done. In the next leg, it was the complete opposite, and Rennes out the gate score 11 goals, but in this back and forth fixture, we get the job done and win 5-3 on aggregate. With us officially qualified for the round of 16, our opponents were Slavia Prague, and in the first leg, much like the game versus Rennes, Slavia themselves received a red card early on and made the game somewhat easy for us, and we win the game 4-2. In the second leg away from home, Milan knew not to underestimate our opponents like we did in the previous round, and we took care of business to win the game 3-1 to progress to the quarter-finals. Our next opponent would be a familiar foe in Roma under a new coach, Daniele De Rossi, after succeeding Jose Mourinho after he was sacked. Now, this was a Roma team that were a lot more different than what we've seen, playing a lot more progressive and more fluid than the old Roma. And this was a difficult game for us, and we failed to take advantage of opportunities, but the main chance to bring anything home to the second leg would be squandered by Olivier Giroud after a fantastic run from Samuel Chukwueze. And being down in the first leg, it looked like going to Rome would be a very tough hill to climb. And in the second leg, there was some sort of optimism from some Milan fans, but it only took Roma 12 minutes to score, followed by a great goal from Paulo Dybala. And later into the first half, Roma actually went down to 10 men, and it looked like maybe Milan can grab something in this game and salvage a good result. But by the time we took advantage, it was just way too late. And just like that, Milan's Europa League campaign was over. And most fans were calling it a failure, as most predicted Milan would actually win the Europa League. But there was just way too much quality. Obviously, Atalanta and Bayer Leverkusen were still in, and there was just no chance that we would beat any of those teams. Now that we were eliminated from all European competitions, let's see where we left off from the league. Inter. Inter have positioned themselves well to win the league if they beat us in the derby, and a lot was on the line not only to win the league, but to do so versus Milan in the San Siro. And from all the fans, there was zero hope and not an inkling that we would show some dignity in this game to prevent our rivals from celebrating the league title in front of our face. And Stefano Pioli puts out the most strange lineup possible, putting Rafael Leao as a sole striker, Pulisic at left wing when all season he's been playing right wing, and he just chucks in Yunus Musa at right wing just because. And it led to another derby loss as we lost 2-1 and Inter win the Scudetto. With the remaining games of the season, we played Juventus that ended in a 0-0 snooze fest, tied versus Genoa 3-3 because of a Malathiao own goal, and obliterated Cagliari to clinch the second place spot in the league, and a 3-1 loss to Torino that had zero effect on us. And to end the season in our last game versus Salernitana, it would be Stefano Pioli's last game he would coach for Milan, along with a farewell to Giroud and Simon Kjær, and they received a nice tribute from the fans and the club. And say what you want, guys, but Stefano Pioli did a lot of great things for Milan, finally stabilizing our club, bringing us back into Europe, and of course, that precious Scudetto win. With the season finally completed, there was a lot of ups and downs, and a lot of great moments, and a lot of very bad moments. And I think you can maybe rate this season just a solid 5 out of 10, just right in the middle. Of course, Stefano Pioli will be gone, so a new coach will come in, which there's still so many question marks on who could be the coach. Conceição, Fonseca, De Zerbi, there's just so many names. And of course, there could be some players going out to bring in some extra cash for the new transfer window. But make sure you guys stay tuned for all that, as you can see more content being posted here. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. Check us out on all of our socials linked below. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Ciao ragazzi. And Forza Milan sempre.